Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we're looking at Spitfire Audio's Labs. Slightly odd name, but doesn't really matter because they've proven themselves and given themselves a position. Now, it's really common when you see someone in a group or forum saying, "Oh, where can I get some good orchestral sounds for free?" There's really only a couple of answers. One of the first answers is going to be Labs. One of the other quality answers, you'll get some stupid answers. But one of the other quality answers is one I've already shown you, which is the BBC Discovery, BBC Symphony Orchestra Discovery, which is $49, but I believe if you still fill in a little thing that they will give it to you free 2 weeks later. And for the price, it's a super little orchestra. I've scored a few things with it. Labs, however, are free. Spitfire themselves have managed to take themselves, and quite deservedly so, into being one of the top names in software scoring tools. And generally, they are good. I don't own any of their big ones. I've got Discovery, as I've noted, and I've used Labs a few times. I used to do scoring work for a little while there, or actually over a decade or so. Tried to do more of it, but just got tired of the fact that for $15, people expected that I was going to clone Hans Zimmer or Silvestri's Avengers score. And that's just not how it works. I know how it works because I've actually got awards for work done in film festivals and what have you, and I know that cloning doesn't get you there, but sadly when clients come and all they want is clone work, you know there's no joy in that. Still open to doing the work, just not chasing that kind of stuff. Letting you know simply because when I talk about things, I do have some credibility here. You can go off and research that if you feel the overwhelming need. But a lot of product, and they've actually done some tie-in stuff with Hans Zimmer as well. So very reputable company, surprisingly reputable company to be giving away free stuff. Because so often the free things are from people trying to find their way into the industry. Now, it's pretty open that Spitfire gives you Labs stuff to get you engaged, friendly with them. But they handle it in a very nice way. Well, I've been very rough on some people who get very aggressive. Spitfire have never been aggressive. The Labs, you click on Labs, as you may have seen me there in amongst the talking, and then you'll be presented with this. The way Labs works, like a lot of Spitfire stuff, is very specific. So I'll warn you right up front, if you don't get things right, you will get things wrong. Even if you think you've got things right, you may have got things wrong. It's an annoyance, but you will get there. But follow their bouncing ball, not what you think you want their bouncing ball to be doing. What you've got is a surprisingly large now, because it's been a long time since I'd looked, surprisingly large collection of instruments. Now, each of these instruments can have several articulations or versions of itself inside. We'll look at download in a moment. They often give you a little bit of a video, and they always have a little bit of a audio teaser, which doesn't always represent the product that you're going to get super well. It's not that they're cheating, it's just somebody's done some creative work with it, which is great. It shows you a possibility, if not necessarily exactly what that thing sounds like. You don't really get to have a clear sense of what's inside. You just get to know, oh, well, there are going to be some electric guitars. But we've got all kinds of things, and you can listen to their things. We're not going to bother with that because I've got something to play you. There are, of course, some adverts for their own things. They've got little $29 products now, which, based on these, I'd say would be pretty good. Lap steel, that could be interesting. Great big collection of things. Some things are more kooky than meat and potatoes useful. Some things are very meat and potatoes useful, like these real meat and potatoes useful, as are the strings. I've used those strings quite a lot of times. They do a stellar job when you know how to manage them. And a little bit of understanding of how to manage the sounds will go a long way. We'll talk about some of that in a moment. So you find something that you like and you say, okay, I think I could use that. You are going to need to follow their bouncing ball. We will come to that in a moment. We'll start by me showing you how might it sound. I've downloaded the Peel guitar, the Wurlitzer, and the choir, and made a little freeform piece. I then thought, well, people probably want to hear something more structured, so I downloaded the drums, the bass, same whirly, the electric guitars, which is not the same as the Peel guitar, and strings 2. Technically, I probably should have downloaded strings 1. I didn't realize at that point that strings 2 was not strings 1, but it's worked. I took my 2 pieces, turned them into 1 piece with 2 very appropriately goofy names. Right, the kind of thing that you might actually get out of a real scored scene. I've kept the sounds as sort of clean and pure as I can. Yes, there's some reverb and a little bit of EQ on each of those just to try to make the mix balance fairly nicely. Not that it's difficult with these. I did pull some bass out of particularly the kick drum, simply because I didn't feel like it flattered what I was doing here. But that gives you a sense of the quality of the sounds. They are on the surface designed more for soundtrack work, but I have no truck with genres. You can use them for anything. There's absolutely no reason why you can't use that drum kit for death metal, if that's what you need it for. It's all about how you use a sound, because you know what? The guys that play death metal will be using the very same Strat as the guy who plays rock and roll and the guy who plays for a washed out film scene. Same guitar. It's all a case of what you do with it. So we might as well at this point have a look at the good and bad about Spitfire's labs. There's very little bad, but in all fairness, I always try to show 2 sides of a story. The good is that they are very high quality sounds. It's exactly what we expect from Spitfire, and they deliver that very solidly. Once you've got them working, they work reliably. And this is a big important part, particularly if you are doing score work. It needs to work reliably because time frames can be really short. I scored a game within a couple of days, and that was not just scoring the game with 2 or 3 pieces of actual music, 3 to 5 minute pieces of music, but I also then turned around and made all the sound effects. Everything has to work reliably. Spitfire stuff can be tricky to get going, but once it's going, it tends to work very reliably. And of course, they are free. Yes, you get some Spitfire advertising and stuff, but it's minimal and it's tastefully done. So really everything about them is good. The bad, as I said, we should be fair. Installs, I keep saying, can be a bit complex and it can fail. It will get there, but you must do exactly what they're asking you to do. I believe that's part of why, once they're installed, they tend to be very reliable and very solid. But if you try to be clever in any way, shape, or form, or if something happens that disrupts the process, it'll... But follow their hints on tips on what to do exactly, and you'll get back out of the hole. Every time you try and fight them, you'll put yourself in the hole. Don't do it. There's no fun. Of course, we can be unkind and say that each of these individual lab sounds is limited or odd. But that is the very nature of them, that they are character things. When you download a drum kit, you're not getting every sound that Batman could conceivably have scraped together, or maybe the Flash, within 5 minutes. It's not. It's, here's a set, and they're going to be really usable. So it's not a fair negative, but I think it's fair to raise to people that if you download strings, you're not getting a full orchestra with every possible articulation. You're just getting a set of strings with, if it's strings 1, it's a long and a short articulation and the ability to play both the longs and shorts together. Strings 2 with a couple of pizzicato and this really slow string. That's it, but they're quality, and if you know how to make them work and you can match your sounds to your composition or match your composition to your sounds, you can get great duty from them. So it's not really a bad, more a warning to understand. I am not a fan of the reverb. I just don't like it, so I turn it off and always use my own. Again, I will always warn about, while orchestral type things can come across and they've got this reverb in them and you put it on, it makes them sound amazing on their own, chances are you're going to have a mismatch. If you've got your orchestra in one reverb room here and the rest of your piece in this reverb room here, they never come together. So you sound like you've got a band and an orchestra somewhere else, and you know, that's not Cayman and Metallica on the one stage. Not that I love that recording, but anyway, at least they were on the one stage, and it's important to get them to the one stage. So consider just turning the reverb off in this or any other orchestral package and creating your own reverb space. You may be wanting to make more reverb space around your orchestra, but be in control of that rather than having a reverb on each individual instrument, which is not the way the Force works. But overall, very, very good once you get them installed. Let's have a look at the installing process. It's all done through a Manager application. If you have a problem with Manager applications, it's going to get hard, but the more pro-end you get, the more Manager applications you'll get. Some of them are really not quite fit for purpose, but they are overall improving, and Spitfire's generally works. It will open up with whatever products you own. That's just my SO Discovery. We move to the Labs tab, because Labs don't appear anywhere but in the Labs tab. We can look at what's not installed, we can look at what's installed, and anything that has or could or should have updates. So we can see these three. Well, I'm not seeing the others. I don't know. This is one of those things that sometimes it seems to be a mismatch between what you've got and what it's got. It gets there eventually. So if we wanted something, then we would click on it or click install. We'd hit install and it'll ask where you want it to go. You don't want the hard drive installed. You don't want them sending that's for if you're buying Albion or something or other and you need them to send you a hard drive with the stuff on it, because they can be enormous. It needs to be in a folder, and it needs to preferably be in a folder on your C drive, somewhere like users public, and then it'll create its own Spitfire folder. Everything goes there. You might want it off on the D drive or somewhere else, and that's okay if you can get it to work, but there's a fair chance that it won't work. You want to be on the fastest drive you can. If you've got an SSD, that's where you want it to be. And normally these days your SSD is your boot drive, so that's what Windows is on. So make sure that everything goes to the one place. Don't go all over your drive, or this will die. You'll hit download, and you can commonly wait a quarter of an hour for one of these things to come across. Whether it's big or not, I don't know, but chances are that's what will happen. When it finishes, this screen here will basically go blank. It won't say, congratulations, you now have this device ready to go, the amplified cello quart ready to go. It'll just go blank. And the way to be sure that you have it is either to look at installed or to open your door and see if it's there. If it's not there, or it has a cow, it'll give you a prompt, and you click that, it'll go to a web page, and it'll tell you about pressing reset buttons and what have you. Do exactly that. Not something you think is what it said, exactly what it said. And after about 12 rounds, you'll probably get it right. It is not the easiest process, but that's basically how it works. Please don't ask me to troubleshoot this. This is between you and Spitfire and Satan. Once you have something installed, then you will go to however your particular DAW works, and you will go add a device, an instrument. You will be looking for Spitfire and Labs. You open Labs, it'll look like this. Initially a little uninspiring. This is a cut down, as in it's a more limited version of, so you don't get all the control that you'd get if you had bought Albion. Up here, you've got a drop down which will allow you to scroll through all the things you have got that are labs and downloaded. You can press the little play button. It'll give you a sense of what that articulation sounds like. Now, bass guitar is the sound. Classic bass amplified is an articulation. Classic bass DI is an articulation. I know that may sound a little strange compared to arco, marcato, pizzicato as articulations, but we might as well keep the same nomenclature rather than inventing weird terms that don't work out very well. So, pizz in sample, pizzicato ensemble, obviously a little quiet, and swells ensemble. You can also say, I want to filter and see things. It took me a little bit to find my bass, but that is filed under electric guitar. Well, I have a little bit of an issue with that. It's perfectly logical that electric guitars and basses might end up under the same place, although right now I don't seem to be seeing my bass. It's one of those things that I find it confusing. Oh, it's because it's under guitar. So electric guitar and bass and general guitar, little things like that. Their management sometimes is a little sloppy, whoever's doing the tagging, not creating the sounds. Then I find my bass. So scroll, you'll find what you're looking for, and then load a particular articulation. So if I wanted to load, might as well load these. I didn't get any joy from them, probably because I was using them wrong, but I couldn't work out how to use them right. Probably didn't put enough time into trying to find a manual. I did put some in. That's running a little slow because they've got some rhythms that appear to be Rexed or something like. I just couldn't get them to actually tune. They're sort of okay on their own, but then once I tried to put them into a piece, I couldn't get them to tune. But the electric guitars, or the one I actually used, was the 80s Plucks, I think. But if we open this one, while you won't get the same kind of fake realism that you do out of one of those VST, here let me play the guitar thing for you, if you use them carefully, you will get nice results. Also, how you use them compared to how the donor instrument would behave is going to have a big impact. If you start playing outside of the range, which thankfully they don't let you do, doesn't matter how much I play those keys up there, they're never going to play because the guitar can't play them. It's a good way to make yourself sound like a fool when you are articulating an instrument outside of its range. Not that I won't do that. I have no problems with doing that, but that's because I'm not chasing pretend realism. but understand how guitar works. And you get something that people will go, oh, that flows nicely, even if it clearly isn't real. In terms of the interface, you've got these bizarrely charactered things, but not named. What their rationale for that is, I don't know, whatever. That one appears to be overall volume. This one's dynamic. Oh, looks like it goes into a drive articulation if you hit probably 127 or above 120. I hadn't noticed that before. This one's dynamics and is pretty common on most things. It's more of a orchestral strings type thing, so it will tend to change the volume. Exactly what it does in each patch can vary, but that's basically it. You've then got this weird thing, which is a turnaround. To get what it is, you click in the middle, so there's a variation. So that's been played in a different part of the guitar. Sounds like it's down on the bridge. Tightness. I'm honestly never sure what that means. Reverb. As I said, I'm not a fan of the reverb in here. It's there, but I just don't like it. Then you've got attack. So in guitar terms, that's like having a rocker pedal, but obviously it's just a so that's like sustain, I mean, letting those strings ring out, which a guitarist will do, but a guitarist will also tend to mute the strings they no longer want ringing out, whereas this process won't. But if you can work out how to get the result you want, very, very workable. We can move to a different sound. Okay, we've got the Wurlitzer. Again, just a really nice, workable sound. And once they're going, as I say, they tend to stay going. And when I need something that one of the labs does, or anything that of the Spitfire things that I've got, when I have the need for what it does, or I'm open to follow where it wants to go in terms of this is the way this sound needs to work, they stay in the mix. And that's important, really important. So we'll kill that fella off. We'll have a little bit of a look at this piece, just to show you how you can get things done, because a lot of people think that, oh, if they get the tool, then things will get done, and it's just not the way it works out. You see a little bit of echo and reverb. That's actually one send. So the first part of this, the new agey bit, is totally freeform. Now, it was composed in the order in which you see the instruments. So I played a line with a pedal guitar, just completely off the cuff. I'm not pretending to be a great player of anything, but I've got a feel. Then took a second run with the Wurlitzer, and note how the whirly and the guitar work together. Boo-doo-doo. Doo-doo-doo. So each of those instruments is working around each other as a conversation. Now, if you have not spent much time playing, you might go, I can't do that. Guess what? Officially, I still can't do that either. People would go, but you know what? They'd be being pedantic. If that flows and you feel like, oh, that's kind of nice, job done. So long as you've got a basic understanding of how, in this case, your keyboard works. If you don't have a keyboard, this is going to be real hard, and you probably should get a keyboard. And I don't mean 2 octaves. I mean at least 4, if not 5. Because if you can't stretch out, you can never come to terms with this thing. You don't have to spend a lot. Novation Launch Key will probably do the job just fine. Preferably get one that has some transport controls that will interface in whatever door you're in, because it's real nice being able to press play on the play button there, rather than the spacebar here, but I still use my spacebar plenty. 4 octaves. They don't have to be too fancy. Personally, I don't use the knobs and sliders on my very expensive Panorama. They're just a very expensive paperweight, it turns out. So find a keyboard that you like the key action. No rights, no wrongs. Understand, you've got 12 tones in your scale. So if we were looking at the keyboard, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Octave. That's it. So that is C major. We don't touch any of them black keys, just the white ones. We work our way up. Let's actually have a sound for this. It's going to be so much nicer for you all. D, E, F, G, A, B, C. The top C we could not count, but we always do because it's unison and it completes. How complete does that sound? It doesn't. So having a basic understanding of that's my key and therefore my scale. That's C major. Once you've learnt C major and feel comfortable with it, you'll find the other keys start to become easier, but ignore them for now. Ignore all of this stuff about rules and this, that, and the other. There's a reason for them, but they're explaining things after the fact. Work them out yourself, and then you'll go, now I understand that rule. Whereas if you try to take the rule and force yourself into, you'll be like, this doesn't make sense. No, they don't. Circle of fourths and fifths, I'd rather kill myself. So, if we are using the same key or scale in all our parts, whether that's 2 hands or 2 or 3 instruments, they'll work. I've got a C and a G, and then an E. Ooh, harmonious. Little tense because we've got a G and an A. That's getting into Shower Scene from Psycho because they are now right next to each other, but an octave apart. Tense but interesting. 2 octaves apart, not much tension at all. It's actually kind of cheery. It's like, oh, that's a bit exciting. So where you see people, and I did this myself, trying to put their whole composition into this octave, like the C2 octave, or more to the point, often the C1 octave. Oh, yes, all right, everything there. Anything above middle C, that's loser territory. That's cheesy, man. I was like, yeah, you're just going to die with that. Each range has its purposes. So we can get a nice feel, and it doesn't matter what genre you're working in. You can be in death metal, the rules still apply exactly the same as they do to jazz funk or Mozart. It's all exactly the same. Just noodle around until you find you're comfortable. Then start to get a sense of, well, where are my chords? If we're pressing C, that's a C chord, nice and easy. There are fancy names for them, but we are not going to go down that road. C, we jump 2 scale tones, which is C, D, E. That's the beginning of a chord. A certain French fellow made a whole career out of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's G, C, E, G. you've now got a tritone. That is a standard chord. If we play that on a D, it's got a different name technically, but it's a D chord. E, F, G, A. Interesting. A has C and E as its top. Ooh, look, there's a relationship. B, C, which is that, only expressed an octave up. The more you get comfortable with that just by playing with it, not by going, what are the rules? Well, I can buy the MIDI pack so that it makes all my decisions for you. No, wrong. Just get comfortable. We can do this. We can take our C, E, and if I don't want to play my G there, I could play it here. It has a different feel from that, even though it's the same notes. Or I could do what's called an inversion, which is my... put it down here. Sounds different, but it's actually the same chord. That's an inversion. Let's not fuss about what name it is, because that's just a waste of time, but just understand that G, C, E is actually still really a C chord. You can root it in the G, like you can put your bass on the G, or you can put your bass on the C, and you're going to be just fine. If we move it to A, we've got A, C, E, so G, C, E, A, C, E. We've got a nice chord. And this is how we can play and find resolution. You kept hearing me finding complex, but we know where we're going to resolve ultimately, which is commonly where we started. Start on C, end on C. So long as we work towards resolution, is a bit more tense than that. So C and F, which is a fourth, it's a perfect, but it's kind of tense, resolves to C and E. Just get used to how that goes by doing it. And when you've got nice sounds like the labs, like you will find it so much easier than if you've got poor sounds, or synth sounds behave differently. It is much easier to learn this with a piano or an electric piano in particular, because you can hear the relationships much nicer than with a synth. While I am a synth man to the bone, it is easier to do this sort of work with particularly electric piano, because there's a clarity to them that lets you hear what you're doing. So that's how the first half it is done. It's just by feeling it, allowing it to flow. That is one approach to composing. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're looking to do floaty film work, death metal, it's still a valid way of composing. The other half of this is structured. And it sounds like, oh, wow, that's got to be so much more complex than what you were doing before. No, actually, it's not. The way that that was built, well, we'll see there are Labs instruments, but you've seen them all before. They all look exactly the same as each other. If we pop this up here, let's just expand this so that we can make sure that we've got it on the screen. The way that this was composed, and I'll put us into a loop. We'll go with this one and we'll work our way through. The way that this was composed, let's just get this mixer back so it's going to be the easiest way for me to do this, was we will have everything muted to start with, and I started with my whirly. So there and there, we'll loop it. And I set up a chord progression. Now again, you're going to be thinking, oh, but that's hard. How do I know what I'm allowed to do as a progression? Oh, I better go by MIDI pack. No, anything is okay. technically there's nothing wrong with as a chord progression. It may be a little harder to work with, but there is no right or wrong in what you do with your chord progressions if you can make it work. You will find something seem more stilted, like that will feel stilted, that will feel difficult. We're going from a D to a B, but we're going almost an octave up, complex. D, B. Now that's going to flow so much nicer. There is your progression. People will try to tell you there's all kinds of rules you have to follow. Ignore those rules until you can find out how to make it flow. Then you might go, oh, I could make that flow nicer if I'd done that. Then it'll make sense to you. Push your way first. So you can either make chord progressions with full chords or chords and inversions. I've started out with an inversion here. Oh, look, that's these first set of notes here. But doesn't matter. If you're going to end up with, let's take what we had before, D, B, E, B, it still works. Still works just fine. If you want to invert some of those bits and pieces, brilliant. Do it until something feels like it flows. That's basically my progression here. I alter it at the end. So that and that are slightly different, because you don't want to do the same stuff over and over and over for 2 minutes, because that's just a good way to make people leave the building after about 30 seconds, where they go, oh, this doesn't ever do anything. Which brings me to this. You will see there are a few extra little bits and pieces in here. These are what make the music flow. You don't need an awful lot, but you do need them. If you don't have ways to make the music flow from one place to another, you will have some difficulties. If we did decide that we wanted to go D to B above, that's a massive leap and it's difficult. If we decide we didn't want to go to D below, too hard. Suddenly becomes easier. If I play a note in the middle, then I can get myself to where I'm going. Oh, this keeps having a technical, but it seems to solve itself. So keep flowing with notes that help lead you to where you're going next. Not only do they lead in time, but they lead in direction. So leads us to the second chord, even though are exactly the same notes, but in terms of timing, they tell us that that's coming. That was inelegant. Is bridging. So find ways just to make sure that everything flows. And the easy way to do that is to say, I feel like I need a flow here. So, okay, let's say I think the timing needs to be about here. Then I will simply create a note there. Not necessarily here. It could be anywhere. I'm just creating the timing. And then I work out how I want the flow to go. The more you do this, the more you'll go, oh, I want that just to be a timing flow, or I want that to be a shape flow. In which case here it's both a time and shape flow, because I want to pre-show this note here. So we've time flowed and we've shape flowed. And then at the end, because we want to roll people, we want people to let this go around again, we've given a leader for the bleep bleep, and then we're going to start again. millions of people would come along and say, but technically, blah, 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 blah. Don't care. The piece works. That's all that matters. Musicologists are fine for after the fact when they can say, oh, look, David Bowie used this chord thing. David Bowie wasn't thinking about those chords. He just went, oh, that feels cool. Let the musicologist decide how clever he is after the fact. The fans don't care. They just go, ooh, that David Bowie song is really cool. I'm going to buy it. That's your job. That's your real job, not to please musicologists. So this is our format. Once we have a chord structure, that's a progression, then we know that everything we do can fit with this. Half our work is done already. You might be like, oh, but that's not relevant for my genre. Yes, it is. You may express those chords differently. You may express them as a... Still the same thing. So the next thing that comes then, in this case I added bass, because bass is kind of easy to do. Let's open the bass alongside, and we can actually move that up a bit. Claim ourselves some space. Well, look at this. This bass is not trying to do anything clever. It's just echoing and playing the bottom line, except for here, in which case it takes the real root note. So we've given the bass a little bit of movement. They could have a lot more movement, but I want to keep this simple, because if I show you the most kind of line, you're just going to go, I don't get that. I had a teacher who would do that, and he was a good teacher. I learned a lot from him, but he would say, oh, here, Benedict, here's how you do this. You can take it there. Right, thank you so much. It sounded good, better when I played it, but it didn't get me anywhere. But with really simple, we can see here, this is actually exactly this, but because this note is played inverted, as in it should be up there, but it's here, our root is still C. I've just moved it to C, so we've got variety. There could be a lot more movement in that bass line. All I wanted that bass line to do was just to reinforce our chord structure. And this is one of the great things with labs, is that the sounds that they give you are practical. They're actually going to work, and they'll fit into a mix pretty darned easily. Then I added the guitar. The guitar is the interesting part, because this is where our variety is. So we'll untick our bass. No, we won't. We will take our guitar, and our whirly looks complex. In the first bit, it seems like they're not the same, but then you realize, hang on, these notes all come together. They're actually all the same notes. I'm not introducing new notes here. I'm just using these notes, possibly in a different octave, and laying them out so that see, some of you would probably prefer that that electric piano were not there, because it gives you a different sort of a feel. So you'll see that a combination of what we talked about already, our chord and movement, both in time and anticipation. So this is what's called an arpeggio. So here's our chord. Let's play it down here. That's the chord. Is arpeggiating the chord. A certain band called Coldplay appeared to do all kinds of amazing stuff because all they ever did was arpeggiate. But rather than arpeggiating like an arpeggiator, I've given it some flow time. So we've held the first note a little bit longer and then the transition there. So it gives it a flow, it gives it movement. If we didn't want our electric piano in the game, we can actually get rid of it at this point. I'd advise keeping it so it's your reference for your composition. And now, rather than doing exactly the same thing for the second statement, I do slightly different things, similar enough that it sounds kind of the same, but different enough that every time it comes through, we're like, ooh, that's different. So it's familiar and unfamiliar, finding a balance. If every single woman that we met looked exactly the same, okay, that'd be kind of cool if, I don't know, they all looked like somebody that we liked, but then there wouldn't be a lot of point to it. A lot of the excitement of women, not being sexist here at all, women, you say that about us all the time, is the fact that they all look different. Ooh, look at that one. Ooh, look at that one. Ooh, look at that one. And the same in music, in that it's... Ooh, that one's a bit exciting. And that constant sense of excitement. So by keeping it moving around, I hear so much, particularly hip-hoppy stuff, where they've got one little thing and the first statement is nice enough, but then that's all they ever do. And you might think I'm boring, sort of hammering the same point over and over again, but just imagine how boring it is to listen to when it's do-do-do, 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 do-do-do. Oh, find me the stop button. Doesn't matter what you're in, follow the thing that you want to do, great, hit those targets. Try to make them your targets, not someone else's targets, because that someone else will never reward you for hitting somebody else's targets. Odd. They'll be very vocal about it, but they'll never actually reward you for doing it. Focus on how to bring constant movement and excitement. So that's now got us to a composition that has all those parts. At this point, I added the drums. Drums, we don't need to have reference to the notes because drums are not tuned. People talk about tuning and that's fine. It's an esoteric thing which can be okay, but is not necessary. We do, however, want to have a feeling that our drums match our other instruments and our piece. There is not a lot of point in having a very mismatched set of sounds unless you find a way to bring them together. I did hear some metal done in the 90s with 808s, and I think it sounded good. The audience in general didn't love it because it was outside their expectation, but that track that I heard, I can't remember what it was, it did work. Now, my advice very strongly is keep your drum programming simple. Really simple, because you'll notice I've done drums last. If you do drums first, you'll fill it up with like all over the place, 300 kick drums and 48 snares and all over the place, like an octopus is drumming. And then you'll have no space for anything to go in. We've got, when our drums are not there, a very defined rhythm. It's got a nice flow to it. Whether it's your genre, it doesn't matter. It's got a nice flow to it. Our drums now, their job is just to emphasize that. And if you listen to them on their own, yes, they're a bit simple. But overall, the piece has nice drive and roll. So I will make commonly my first 2 bars, which is like, okay, that's my core pattern. I'll copy that off, make a little bit of a variation, as in something is slightly different between those 2. So I've now got 4 bars. Copy that off, another little variation. In this case, we've got a ting on the front and a boom on the end. That's enough. Same again, and in this case, we don't hear it because it's, actually, no, it is there. We've got a little bit more rolly stuff. We back off some of the hats because remember, a guy only has 2 arms, and it's unlikely that he will be playing this hi-hat here and that tom over there. It is doable, but it's unlikely. Chances are he will play maybe a cymbal or a ride here and this tom. It's just not comfortable to do this. So that variety will happen naturally because he's going to do that rather than that when you're already doing this with your hi-hat and then suddenly doing that. It's nowhere near as interesting or exciting as doing that with your kit. So real simple, drums come together. Definitely make sure your drums and your bass are working together. Then the last bit is the strings. The strings seem complex. Orchestration seems complex, but you know what? It's not. Not at the beginning. It can get as complex as you want it to be, but at the beginning it's not. All the timings are off on this because it's a very slow sound. So if you find that you've got a string sound that speaks really slowly, grab the MIDI and drag it backwards in time. See, so I want the note to feel like it's sounding here, but in reality, if I'm listening and it feels like it's sounding somewhere around here, I'm just going to drag this back a few sixteenths or whatever. There are other tools, like if you've got a some sort of groove system, you can use this to slide your track backwards and forwards, whatever. That's up to you and your DAW, but it's common enough that strings in particular in the MIDI will be dragged a little bit back. So you might compose with them where they are and then go, okay, I'll just drag them back. So then you find that they speak more where they're supposed to speak. See? And it's quite common for guitars and strings to start to speak a little before their beat, because that way they sound like they're in time, otherwise they sound like they're late, and that's not nice. If we bring in our whirly, we will see that these are surprisingly close to the whirly's line. See? There are some variations, so a little tiny bit of harmony in here as we go through. And it resolves on our root note, which is C. So very, very simple. You take those chords that you've already got. You can even just copy the whirly chords into your strings or orchestration and then just play with them a little differently. Remember how with the whirly I said you put some time and movements. So this one is both time and movement flow. You can do the same with your strings. I've kept this string line simpler most times, but here it gets a little bit more complex than the whirly. And that just gives us that sense of, oh, there are these big floating strings now inside our sounds. Is that a great composition? Again, not the point. Nice sounds do make this so much easier. So now we've got our basic structure. We can just drag it out. I don't recommend writing all your parts and then dragging it out. It's not the right way to go. Have a sense of what your arrangement is from the beginning. You know, if you've got a song that's 3 verses and a chorus, then you already know you're probably going to have a verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, or maybe you're going to have a verse, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, chorus, slash standing on a guitar or on a piano whilst playing guitar. And then you're going to have a chorus. And then someone going, add to fade. Ad-lib to fade is the official term for that. That's your structure. Have an arrangement structure. So many people come unglued, they make this loop, they keep piling up 47 different instruments, then they go, now I can't make a piece of music. It's time. Forward, move forward. So you see in this case that we state that, then we come in and state it again. But the addition of those strings has given us a different feel. So your arrangement can have a lot of similarity. But if this were more complex, if this were a verse-chorus type thing, my verse would have one structure, my chorus would have a slightly different structure. I may have a little bridge between the two to commonly called a pre-chorus to get us from there to here, especially if I changed key in the middle of it, which I'm not going to encourage you to do until you understand what that actually means. But we've then got a sense of flow. Notice how at the end of this, that gives us the bridge to the next bit. It's just as simple as with the toms. Between these two parts, which almost don't seem like they belong together, because they don't, I've used a couple of devices. One is to start to bring the drums in a little early. They're just starting to fade in. If you watch here, you see the whole rolly rock section fades in. So the fade stops it from crashing, because otherwise they just crashed. And the other is a fade on this side. So we've actually dragged out some of these where these finish, because they finish in hang, and then faded them out as well. You notice this just... But notice they don't do some sort of perfect fade like that, because that's just weird. We've decided which we want to carry how. And so particularly the choir sound carries in as the rolly rock starts its thing. On the other end, I again had to work out how do I transition these two pieces that actually do sort of seem to have a relationship, but more because I forced them to than anything else, is that I've given a resolution on our bass, our whirly, and our strings. They've resolved to C, and also given some preparation to move to where they're going, like here. This is the note that's carried over, and these are the new notes. So you see that that's not in here, and yet it's in here. We've got the same sound playing twice over the top of each other. Little bit of drum to help let us know that something's finishing and to give us a sense of, oh, there's something happening here. The strings fade, we fade back the rolly rock instruments, but they continue to play to help tie this in. Otherwise, this transition, without the sense of them continuing, would be like, what are we doing? And I hear so many things where, particularly in rap, where people have used loops, they haven't thought, how do I transition? And that transition honestly can be as simple as to carry them from to there see? That comes largely because they're just using slabs of sounds and gluing them together, but the fact that they haven't thought, how do I transition? You see that most of my transition here is actually done with fades, more so than with notes. The notes are super important, but the fades, particularly at the beginning, are really what's carrying the show more than anything else. Find how to transition it, not to just lurch. I know in my early work I used to lurch. I remember somebody pointing it out. It's probably my brother very kindly pointing out, oh, your piece has just changed direction several times. It's like, screw you. But they did. They just lurched from one pattern to another until I started to understand, how do I make those transitions? I felt like I understood what they were doing as they went bloop, bloop, but other people wouldn't have understood that as well. So work out how to smooth those transitions, and then you have what's called an arrangement. And once you've got an arrangement that flows and tells your story, you're probably good to go. So, little bit of extra stuff outside of what you think you want to know about with labs, but the reality is there's no point having these nice sounds because they're very usable, but they're character sounds. There's no point having them if you don't know how to use them. So I thought it's pretty important. Let's run through some of the basics, and rather than going, I'll rely on MIDI packs or I'll rely on somebody else's rules, start to work out how to get that sense of a flow. Actually, that's a different articulation from the other whirly. So I've got the softer one and the harder one. So they weren't actually the same sound, but we can work out how to get that flow just by having the courage to play. And this is where we need to not practice, but to actually sit down. That's kind of cool. And that's how we find our flow. Once we found our flow, doing this kind of, for me, is sort of noodly, new agey, weird jazz kind of, who knows what this guy's doing. I've actually gotten better flow in other kinds of work. So doing this makes me a better mix engineer as well. So take your time, learn to settle in until this starts to come out of you. Because remember, music, if we look at score, like an orchestra score, you know, put these dots and lines and what have you in front of you and hand you a flute and say, play that. There are some people who sadly think, especially if they've come up through the grade system, that they have to reproduce exactly what's on the page like a robot. And even in orchestras, that's not how it goes. You have to have the music inside you to be able to understand what the dots are telling you, because the dots are not music. The music's in you. The dots are merely indicators as to how to get what the composer was thinking out your tutti flutti. And the more you do that, particularly as an indie trying to make your own banging, grooving rock and roll tune, then really see that. The dots and the lines are not relevant other than a way of presenting. These days we present through CDs or MP3s. So we all get given the definitive Beatles, the definitive Adele, the definitive whoever, the Darkness, right from the beginning. Whereas back in the old days, there was no definitive, because if you lived a couple of suburbs over from Mozart, you probably never met Mozart, never heard Mozart playing Mozart. Mozart may not have got to play Mozart most of the time either, because he may not have had access to a big enough orchestra to do what he wanted to do. So he's sitting there on a pianoforte going, yeah, okay, wishing he could have had a full orchestra. So putting the dots on the page is about transferring. You doing music is about learning how to find that, let that music come out. And then when you approach your door, you're working out how to put that into the definitive form. So any questions? Not so much about how to make labs install. I'm not Spitfire support. They've got support on these. Follow it, do exactly what it says. Don't get creative. If anything goofy happens in the middle, follow their instructions, do exactly what they say, don't get creative. That should get you there eventually. But in terms of how to approach this kind of stuff, they are great sounds, they're character sounds. Follow where the sounds want to lead you. And we'd probably love to actually hear things that you've made with this process. Not to spam and just dump the here, listening to my tune, go over to Spotify, give me likes. That will be deleted. But if you've done stuff that follows this process, feel free to share it down below and explain how you've followed this process, how it's helped you. And then we won't hit the delete because we'll have a lovely conversation. You have a great day now.